Hello and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. She's the founder and the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is March 12th, 2025, and I'm Harley Schlanger and I'll be your host. You can send your questions and comments to Helga via email. Send them to questions@schillerinstitute.org or post them on the chat page. Helga, with the rapid pace of developments, it's really hard to keep up. So I'd like to begin with your view of the big picture, a tour d'horizon. Where do you see things standing today in this turbulent transition period between two paradigms?
Well, as you say, things are moving so quickly, it is hard to keep up. I just said the same thing to somebody else just a little while ago. But I think the signs are definitely promising. I think the meeting in Saudi Arabia between Rubio and I think it was Hjalmar from the Ukrainian side, I think it went well. Now I think Vance or Waltz. No, I think it's Waltz is on his way to Moscow. The Russians have basically not yet commented on the outcome of the negotiations between the U.S. and Ukraine, saying that they are waiting for the American delegate to come and brief them. But I think this is going in the right direction. Now, I don't know if the Russians will agree to what was worked out in Riyadh, that we will know within a day or so. But I think it is definitely moving in the right direction. And I think what Foreign Minister Lavrov said in an interview with some American bloggers who visited him in Moscow, among them Larry Johnson, who was on this program several times, and Judge Napolitano, and a third person. And Lavrov said in this dialogue, when he was asked, how he assesses the present developments between the United States and Russia, he said that he thinks that things are going back to normalize, meaning, that the two great powers, the two largest nuclear powers, if they start to have a dialogue again, that should be normal. And, I have really said many times that anybody who is not a moron should be happy about that. Because, we were, according to many experts, really reasonable, seasoned military experts of many countries, we were going in the direction of a nuclear confrontation so rapidly in the final weeks of the Biden administration, with ever more powerful, wide-range, long-range weapons being delivered to Ukraine, and really reaching the tripwire condition very, very closely. So if this is now, at least that part of the world strategic crisis is coming to a more calm period, anybody who is not a moron should be happy about that. Because if it ever would come to a military confrontation between the two largest nuclear powers in the world, nobody would survive the consequences. Now, is everybody happy about that? Well, it's very interesting. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, who has been trying to egg on the US to keep going, to even, lining up with Macron in the recent period to keep the war in Ukraine going, even if the United States is trying to make a peace agreement. He now welcomed the outcome of the Riyadh meeting by saying that he warmly, full-heartedly agrees and congratulates President Trump for this success. Now, I think that the British, who were really the most freaked out about this rapprochement between Trump and the Russians, obviously fear for the existence of the special relationship between London and Washington, which has been the basis of the unipolar world after the end of the Cold War. And, if the United States is moving away from that, they were sort of hanging in the air. Now, obviously, this is not shared by everybody in Europe. The Europeans are in an unbelievable frenzy to keep the war going, to go into an unprecedented rearmament drive for all of Europe. Now, President Macron apparently had a behind closed door meeting of 37 countries and their military leadership or chief of staff or military heads of the army, whatever it was. And obviously they have been planning how to keep the war going, and even talking about French troops into Ukraine, all of these things. Von der Leyen is basically trying to push through the European Commission the Rearm Europe Act, where she wants to have 800 billion euro devoted for militarization of Europe for the next several years. And she wants to do that without consulting or even informing the European Parliament by evoking Article 122 of, I think, the Lisbon Treaty, which is basically an emergency condition, which I think is highly undemocratic and just shows you the nature of what this apparatus, this permanent bureaucracy has become. And, the fact that they are now definitely trying to prevent Ceausescu in Romania from participating in the presidential election is just another sign of the disappearance of democracy, which I think should worry anybody. So you have a very strange situation, where the two large powers, the United States and Russia, seem to be on a course of, as Lavrov said, back to normalcy, dialogue, resolving the Ukraine crisis, hopefully in the short term, while some Europeans are absolutely driven by this idea that they have to now militarize. And I think this is very dangerous, because if you now start to create budgets, and Merz is trying to do the same thing in Germany, we will see if he succeeds. If you start to create military budgets outside of the regular budget, sort of in the tradition of Schacht and his Mefo bills, that becomes or can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you create a bubble which is not creating real wealth, but is creating military machinery, ammunition, weapon systems of all kinds, eventually that has to be either used and conquer some other country, or it will basically be it has to somehow to be immortalized in some way or fashion. And that's the big danger, which is then becoming the drive for war. So I think that what we are doing from the Schiller Institute is we basically address this situation. And I didn't even touch yet the Middle East. There are many other crisis spots naturally around the world, but basically with the idea that the only way how you can get order into this very very quickly evolving situation, which has many bumps and difficulties, is to move to a completely new paradigm, namely the idea that you have to have a new security and development architecture which addresses all of these problems at once, by creating a new system where everybody has their interest taken care of. And the model for that, obviously, is the Peace of Westphalia of 1648, which ended 150 years of religious warfare, and where the war parties agreed on principles first and then proceeded to hammer out the details. And I think such an approach is absolutely what is needed today.
Well, that certainly was a tour d'horizon, and you gave us a lot of things to think about. Uh, if you have questions or comments, send them in to us, questions@schillerinstitute.org. And I have a few questions here, Helga. The first one is from a podcaster in Canada who asked for your view of what it means that there will be normalization of relations between the US and Russia. You touched on that in your first answer, but maybe there's more you have to say. And he also asked if you have any comments on Mark Carney, formerly head of the Bank of Canada, then the Bank of England, and one of the promoters of the Great Reset, of his appointment or his election as Prime Minister of Canada.
Well, I think that the normalization between the United States and Russia, there is actually a rich history where Russia and the United States were collaborating, going all the way back to the American Revolution and in the 19th century, actually in the Second World War. So, it is not that you start from scratch, but that there is actually a basis for the large powers in the world to cooperate. And I think now, I think if that works out well, it can also become the bridge of, reaching into the global south, because, if the United States is on the line of the previous administration, then there is a conflict between the BRICS and the United States, and the United States and the global south. But if you have a rapprochement between the United States and Russia, which is actually very appreciated by many countries in the global south because of the support the Soviet Union gave to them in their fight for independence, that can also be the stepping stone of remedying the relationship between the United States and the global majority of countries. Now, if that works out, we have to see, but I think that potential definitely is there, because Russia is very not isolated. The entire NATO narrative that Russia is isolated, that Russia has to be defeated, all of this, it did not happen. Russia is very well connected to most countries in Africa, in Asia. So that's one thing. On Mark Carney, I think he is probably the incarnation of the city of London and Wall Street and the military-industrial complex combined, because he was one of the advocates of this regime change, whereby, not governments should make policy, but the central banks. This was this big debate which you referred to from the Jackson Hole meeting in 2019, where they decided the Green Deal, the Great Reset, and all of these things. Have you heard about the Green Deal recently? I think they sort of let it drop into the nothingness. It's not being talked anymore about, and it did not work, obviously. So that now they need a new bubble, and the new bubble obviously is the militarization. And given the fact that Canada is part of the Commonwealth, and the King Charles is actually the King of Canada as well, I think one has to watch this very careful. What is the implication, because they obviously put him there to counter everything Trump is doing, especially naturally in light of the announcement of Trump that he wants to make Canada the 51st state of the United States, which didn't go over so well among many people in the world. But I think that's definitely something to be watched, because he is, there are very few people who as much represent the absolute incarnation of this monetarist maximization of profit system, which has been behind a lot of the ills of the world.
Now, here we have something from a subscriber to the EIR Daily Alert. And if you're not already subscribing to it, you should be, because this is the daily picture of the world that we put together. But she writes, I'm circulating your statement against rearming Europe, but I must admit I'm very pessimistic. I can't believe that European leaders have learned nothing from the history of the last century, as you explain in your statement. Do you really believe they can wake up before we're in World War III?
well, we better wake them up. I don't think that's necessarily that they will wake up by themselves, because they're really hardcore, and you can see it in Germany, for example. You have certain representatives of the media and certain think tank people, maybe a couple of dozens, but some very prominent. They pop up in every talk show, in every interview, and they are really hardliners, and they have this absolute dogged determination, that you have to absolutely prevent Putin from conquering Poland and the Baltic states, and that by 2029, for sure, Russia has built up its capacities again, so that he will attack another European country. And therefore, we have to absolutely abandon any social welfare that will come soon. But it's already in the wings. And these people, I was really wondering what makes them tick, because obviously they're professional analysts. So, naturally, if you keep shouting there's a German proverb which says, the way you shout into the woods, the echo comes out, which I think is a very good image, because, you can just imagine you have a peaceful landscape, a forest and fields and grass, and then somebody stands at the wood and yells, "You bastard, you idiot, you demon," and naturally, eventually you will get some demons to come out of the woods. I mean, it's a fantasy. I don't think Russia has a intention to conquer Europe. Why would they want to do this? The place is not functioning right now. Russia is a very large country. They have 11 time zones. They have more undeveloped raw materials than, all of Europe together. What would be the purpose of them to conquer Europe? It does not make sense. And these so-called experts, they have not proven their case. They just insist on it. And, since they are very well distributed in the mass media, they have managed to a very large extent to convince a lot of people that that is the case. But I don't think it is the case. And I'm just thinking, what can one do to disprove this narrative? So that's why I'm pushing this completely different approach of a new security architecture, because I think if one is confronted with a unsolvable problem, you have to move to a new plane, a higher level of reason. And so please continue to support this appeal, because I think if we manage, this appeal is basically addressed to, people of reason, so that the European leaders recognize that their view is not shared by a majority of the world population. So help to distribute this statement, get as many signatures as you can. And I think that that's the best we can do at this point, to prevent that this thing becomes an automatism where at a certain point it is too late.
And that statement that you wrote is available at schillerinstitute.com. And again, people should sign it and circulate it for other people to sign it. And go to your local political officials and labor figures and church leaders and make sure that people know about this. Now, Helga, on this point, there's a comment. Someone wrote in and said the discussion of NATO expansion as a cause of the Russian special military operation and the shock therapy is now going much more out into the public. Lyndon and you were way ahead on this story. I just want to congratulate you and ask, are you finding that there's a growing recognition of your work over the years on this?
Yes and no. I think I think yes, because there is a growing number of people internationally who do express also to me directly, and some of my colleagues, that they really appreciate the work we are doing, especially because we have been unwavering, that we didn't put our little coat with the wind, as we say in Germany. but that we stuck to our principles, the principle being that we need a more just world economic system for all countries of the world to flourish. But there's also an increased effort to suppress what we are saying, I think there are several indicators that where they try to suppress our view. I'm not yet at a point where I can present you the whole picture, but I think on several fronts we observe that. We are not the only ones, obviously. If they can abandon entire elections, like in Romania, and the color revolution apparatus is still functioning, the fact that President Trump is now dismantling the subversive elements of the US AID does not mean that the structures are not still at work in several European countries. So anyway, to just answer your question, I think, yes and no. On the one side, there are more people expressing appreciation, but I think, unless we have moved the whole world to a new outlook, where we replace confrontation with cooperation, I think this will be still a lot of battles to fight. So yeah, that's what I think.
Now, here's a question. You've touched on the Romania situation a couple of times, and I have an email here from a self-described Hungarian freedom fighter. And what he writes is, he asks, why did the Constitutional Court disqualify Georgescu from running for president of Romania? What do you think? Was there pressure to disqualify him from the so-called democracy advocates of the European Union?
Well, I don't have the intelligence exactly what is wrong with this constitutional court. I think that the population in Romania is very upset that, Ceausescu won the election already once, then he qualified to participate in the next election, and then they banned him with the argument that his paperwork was not adequate, which is a flimsy argument. But I think one very compelling reason is the fact that the United States is building the largest military base in Romania right now. And that may be a reason why they definitely don't want to have a president who they say is friendly to the outlook of Russia and critical of the EU. But I think that's definitely an issue everybody who believes in democracy should be very concerned about, because, if you cancel candidates who win elections, you're not talking about a democracy anymore, you're talking about a dictatorship.
Well, I remember when in one of the primaries in Lyndon's campaign, where he came in, I think, second with 26 or 28% of the vote, they refused to seat his delegates. So it's not an unprecedented action. Now, there's a question on the Egyptian plan for rebuilding Gaza. Someone wrote in and said, it seems that Netanyahu has rejected the Egyptian plan for rebuilding Gaza, not surprisingly. If he won't support it, is there any way it can go ahead? For example, could the Saudis withhold the mutual recognition that Israel wants if he won't accept the plan?
They could. I mean, my conviction is that the only way how the Egyptian plan is definitely a step in the right direction. But as you have, as we discussed many times, I believe that permanent, durable peace in Southwest Asia is only possible through a large-scale development program like we have presented it with the Oasis plan. And that, however, I think that really requires the strategic cooperation between the United States, Russia, and China. If these three countries can come to an agreement, and there are reports that President Trump is probably calling Putin this week. He said he wants to visit or wants to meet Putin in person very soon. He also wants to meet President Xi probably within a month. If these developments go well, and therefore the geopolitical confrontation of the large powers can be overcome in the Middle East, then I think all the other problems can be solved, like given the fact that China has already mediated between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The whole Middle East has been a proxy war stage theater like the Ukraine is. So therefore, I think a solution has to come from the top down, and then everything can be settled. So that's, I think, is the perspective.
I have a question for you from Thomas B., who said, it was reported that Commerce Secretary Lutnick is the architect behind the Trump tariff policy. I'm not sure that that's true, but he asks, do you know what is the intent behind the use of tariffs?
I think that is an Achilles heel of the Trump administration, because just this morning at midnight, Trump definitely imposed 25% tariffs on European steel and aluminum exports to the United States. Von der Leyen immediately answered several hours later with making a 25% import on whiskey, on peanut butter, and it sounds ridiculous, but the total sum on both sides is 26 billion euro, and that's not peanuts. That will mean, things will get more expensive. The consumer will have to pay the price. It will drive inflation up. And, if the threat to then also include auto imports into the United States, it could really hurt the European car economy, especially the German economy. And then that will be countered again with something else. I think this is really a wrong idea. I mean, obviously, Trump thinks he protects the American production and he can lure more investors into the United States by doing all of these things. But I think it hurts everybody. It's a lose-lose game. And I think it's a ill-conceived theory, because, when Alexander Hamilton and the early founding fathers were talking about tariffs, also, later Henry C. Carey and Friedrich List and so forth, it was a completely different situation, because tariffs do make sense if you have a young, nascent economy which has to be protected against conditions of much stronger economies who dominate the trade. In that case, tariffs may make sense, but not if you have a totally integrated world economy. Like, for example, if you look at the different levels of production between the United States and China, or China and Europe and the United States, if you try to disentangle that, decouple, de-risk, whatever you want to call it, it hurts all sides. So I think that hopefully can be remedied, because I think that together with the cryptocurrency is definitely a weak flank of the Trump economic policy.
Now, let me finish by asking you about this week's International Peace Coalition meeting. The IPC has been at the forefront of pulling together people from different walks of life, different nations, different levels of involvement. And it's been going on now almost for 100 weeks in a row. What's planned for this week?
Definitely have an assessment of what's going on in Syria, where you have a major flare-up of civilians being killed. We will have several experts talking about that, also an estimate about the Egyptian Gaza plan and where are we heading in the Middle East in general. Naturally, we will have definitely speakers about the condition of the Ukraine crisis. What is the aftermath of the Riyadh meeting? What is the general condition between the United States and Russia? and what about the European reaction to that? So you should absolutely tune in and participate, because that is the place where every week you can have top experts giving you their view, and that is definitely a very important addition to what you can read in the mainstream media, because these are all people who have lifelong experience as analysts, as military specialists or diplomats. So you should definitely be part of it. And it is a growing peace movement of people who are fighting for a new paradigm to get out of this present strategic dangers.
Well, Helga, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for doing what you do, and we'll see you on Friday.
I hope so. Till then.